apples are very rich in something called pectin. It's a chemical that comes out and it's a setting agent, but pectin is like nectar for your gut microbiome. Your gut microbiome absolutely loves pectin. It helps it to grow. It makes it stronger. It makes it more diverse. So actually, if we have one apple a day, or it could be any stoned fruit like a peach or a plum or anything with stones in it, if you, instead of having a glass of alcohol, have an apple, it actually helps your gut microbiome to produce short chain fatty acids, but also hormones like serotonin, which actually make us happier. So instead of having a glass of alcohol before you go to bed, have an apple.
Welcome to the Choice Space podcast. I'm Dr. Lee David, GP, CBT therapist and author. Today, we're exploring how the gut and the liver work together to support health and well-being. The gut microbiome, the community of microbes living mostly in our intestines, play a key role in digestion, in immunity and in metabolism. It's a constant two-way communication with the liver and brain, helping the body stay in balance. When that balance is disrupted, it can affect our energy, inflammation, and our long-term health. My guest today is Professor Debbie Shawcross. She's a Professor of Hepatology and Chronic Liver Failure at King's College London. Her research investigates the gut-liver-brain axis and the microbiome in chronic liver failure, helping us understand how these systems interact and what this means for prevention and recovery. Debbie, welcome. Could you start by telling us a little about your background and what first drew you to studying liver disease and the microbiome?
Absolutely. Lovely to be here, Lee. So I am, as you say, a professor of hepatology and liver disease. And how did I first start out? So I trained as a junior doctor. And then when it came to registrar training, I actually trained as a gastroenterologist initially. And I trained in Oxford and in London. And during my gastroenterology training, I got really, really interested in how important the liver is. It's the factory in the body. It has so many different functions, and there's nothing that we can do or we can't do without the liver being involved. And so I kind of got a bit hooked into liver disease. And then I ended up doing a PhD in looking at the effects of liver disease on the brain. So that's how we're getting to the brain. In that when people develop liver disease, some individuals develop almost like a dementia-like syndrome. We call it encephalopathy, and it can be absolutely debilitating. And so I spent 3-4 years doing a PhD understanding how the liver affects the brain and how failing to regulate and detoxify things from the gut causes problems with the brain. And then that really took my interest and research into linking the gut and the liver more closely. So as a gastroenterologist, I was studying the gut, but I was also very interested in the liver. And so I really moved on to looking at how the gut and the liver and the brain talk to each other and how that's important in driving lots and lots of outcomes in people with liver disease. But more recently, we've been understanding that actually we shouldn't just focus on liver disease itself, because that kind of link between the gut and the liver and the brain, it can affect so many different conditions. So we've been very interested in looking at the role in things like Parkinson's disease, in Alzheimer's, in depression, in allergy, in autoimmunity. There's a link here that's really, really important and actually relevant to lots of other chronic diseases.
Wow, that's really interesting. So let's just think a little bit about the liver. Let's start with some of the basics and just remind us what role the liver has and why it is so important. And then we can maybe look at some of these relationships and how it might be talking to other areas of the body as well.
Yeah, of course. So we only have one liver. People often ask me, how many livers do I have? You only have one liver, but it's a very, very big organ. It can be in a man up to 2 kilograms. So it's a very, very big organ that sits on the right-hand side of our body under our ribs. And it is like the factory in our body. Whenever we, for example, ingest a meal, we have breakfast and we absorb all of our breakfast and our nutrients in our guts. And those nutrients are then absorbed and travel via a big vein that joins the gut and the liver together called the portal vein. So everything that we eat from our guts goes straight through to our liver. So our liver's kind of a processing plant, really. And what that does, it takes all the goodness and all the nutrients and all the things that we need from our diet and absorbs and takes up what our body needs. And actually, it gets rid of and excretes the things that we don't need. But the liver also is important for making lots of proteins, lots of vitamins, other enzymes, and things that we need in our body to keep us going. So it probably has more than 500 different functions if we counted them. And we can't live without our liver. So if we didn't have a liver, we just wouldn't be able to survive. But what's really important to acknowledge is that because the gut and the liver are linked via this big vein, they're continually talking to each other. And so the gut microbiome is also continually talking to your liver. And that's a really, really important relationship.
So we've got the liver, which sounds incredibly important in regulating so many different processes that will affect our health and well-being in lots of really complex ways. And we can't function without a liver. And then we've also got the gut and the microbiome within the gut. And yes, it would be great to hear more about that. So they're having a conversation, and it sounds like that's quite a complex conversation as well that involves the microbiome and perhaps other factors as well. Let's hear a little bit more about the microbiome. And I'm really interested in thinking about my liver and my gut having a chat with each other and what they're saying.
No, of course. So just to maybe give this some context, we're talking about the gut microbiome, but actually we live in a microbial world. We're continually surrounded by bacteria all the time and organisms, and that's really, really important. And so the gut microbiome is an area within our bodies that contains trillions and trillions of different bacteria and microorganisms. It even includes viruses and phages, and these form an ecosystem within us. And if we were to weigh our gut microbiome, believe it or not, so even though these are microscopic organisms, if you weighed your entire gut microbiome, it would weigh 2 or 3 kilograms. It's quite incredible. So it's a really, really important part of us. So we've got trillions and trillions of these organisms all living in this very tight-knit, complex community. It's like a little city, and every little organism within us has a function. So, what people I think don't realize is that these microorganisms inside us actually have functions. They actually help us metabolize food. They produce hormones. So, for example, some gut microbes produce the hormone serotonin, which is a happy hormone that helps to keep our brain happy and in good shape. So if you didn't have a gut microbiome, actually you couldn't function very well at all. It's really, really important. And of course, sometimes you can have, as with any community, you have some really good players in that community, some of the really good guys, the good bacteria. And then sometimes you have bacteria that are less beneficial that live in that community. But it takes everybody to live together to make something close knit. And what we find is that the good guys keep the bad guys in check, and vice versa. So you have this really important balance that needs to be maintained. And a lot of these products that are produced by our gut microbiome are then absorbed into the big vein, this portal vein, into the liver. And then the liver then distributes a lot of these important products around the body. It's also important to say that the gut microbiome is also very important for maintaining health in our immune system as well. So if your gut microbiome becomes imbalanced, actually it can affect your immune system. So it can make you more vulnerable to developing infections. And if your gut microbiome is disturbed, it can actually make you more vulnerable to developing nasty things and flus and coughs and colds. So there's this really delicate balance, and you have this barrier in your gut that the bacteria help to maintain. So they can actually protect you from invasion of nasty things. So we want to be friends with our gut microbiome. I think it's important to say. And sometimes people ask me, can you give a good example of what the microbiome is? And it's like a box of Quality Street, I'm going to say, at Christmas. We're coming up to Christmas. A box of Quality Street has lots of colours and flavours of sweets and shapes. And that's what our gut microbiome looks like, if you want to try and picture it. But if our gut microbiome gets harmed, and a really good example of how our gut microbiome might get harmed is if, for example, we have a course of antibiotics for something, an ear infection or a urine infection. We take a course of antibiotics. Now, what that unfortunately does is, although it kills bad bacteria when we have an infection, it can also affect your gut microbiome and your good bacteria. So what then happens is you lose some of that diversity in that ecosystem. And it's a bit like at the end being left with all the orange and the strawberry creams. And what happens is your gut microbiome can get to that state for a little while. And actually it takes a little while then for it to rediversify and form its tight ecosystem again. And the last thing I just want to mention, just because it's so important, is our diet is really, really important for our gut microbiome. The better our diet is, the healthier our diet is, the more fruit and vegetables we have, the more fibre we have, the more healthy our gut microbiome is, the more diverse it is. And the better it is for us, because it not only helps to manage our metabolism and our mood and our sleep, but also to protect us from things like infections. So it's very, very important that we look after our gut microbiome as much as we can.
So it sounds like, I love that analogy of the box of Quality Street. And I can imagine if you've got left the ones that nobody likes at the end of Christmas, and we don't want that for our microbiome. What we want is that lovely mix, that range of different colours and shapes and sizes. To get that balance, it probably means that we can cope better with some of the ones that are less helpful, because they're balanced out by all the other colours and shapes and sizes. So then they have less of an influence. And so we're not aiming to just get one lot of good ones, but just have that really diverse range that can work together as a complex community, as you're saying. So it sounds like this is somewhere where choice can come into it. This is a choice-based podcast, and we're always looking for things that people can do that do lean into how we can start to support health and well-being. And so what I'm hearing there is something about how we approach what we eat that can encourage our microbiome to look more like that real lovely mix of different colours and shapes versus one that is perhaps less helpful. Can you give us a bit more information about what kinds of choices? So you've mentioned about fibre, and I'm just wondering if diversity of nutrition and perhaps something about processed foods possibly might influence that. What are your thoughts about the key factors that make the biggest difference from a nutrition point of view?
So a good way to think about it is that you need to have a really colourful diet. Think of a rainbow, okay, and think of all the different colours in the rainbow. And what we should try to do is to try and have a diet that's as colourful as a rainbow. So what we want to do is have lots of different types of fruit and vegetables. And when I say colours, think about things that are orange and they're red and they're green and so on, because we know that the more diverse your diet, the more diverse your microbiome. So having a really colourful diet with lots of fruit and vegetables, lots of things with fibre in it, seeds, nuts, anything like that, it's really important. And it's what's also important is actually sometimes having a really healthy diet and looking after your gut microbiome can actually help with things like weight loss, for example, because actually your gut microbiome can help to control your metabolic rate. So if we look after our gut microbiome and keep our gut microbiome more active, it burns up calories and can extract things from our diets far more efficiently. Whereas if we have things that are not so good for the gut microbiome, and you used a great example, processed foods. So lots of foods that have got lots of different chemicals and emulsifiers and all these sorts of things, they're not so good for the gut microbiome, and they actually impact adversely the bacteria that are living there. They can't do their job so well, and that they become more unhappy. So that's really important. The other thing that is really important, because it can also affect your gut microbiome, is alcohol. Alcohol's been a really important thing, I think, that's got a lot more visibility recently, in that, alcohol in small amounts is fine. But actually, if we drink alcohol in higher amounts or in beyond the recommendations that we would of a doctor, then actually the alcohol itself can make your gut microbiome quite sick and your gut barrier quite leaky. And having a big alcohol binge, going out and having a bottle of wine or something like that actually can make your gut leaky overnight and mean that some toxins from your gut can leak into your system and actually make you feel quite unwell. So it's not just about things like having a hangover. It can actually have more long-term adverse effects on our body and also our brains, because we've been talking about the brain too.
So I certainly over my career seen the recommendations about alcohol. They seem to have come down. And do you think that reflects an increasing awareness of some of the harms of alcohol, even at perhaps lower doses or lower amounts than people have previously understood to cause problems? From your point of view, working with chronic liver disease, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so that's a really important point, Lee. So yes, we're beginning to understand that alcohol is not a good thing for our bodies. And I think people used to very much focus on it's bad to smoke or it's bad to take drugs, but actually alcohol's okay. But actually drinking alcohol in more than moderate amounts is a really bad thing. And we used to have much higher recommended limits of alcohol in the past, and they've come down now. So really, for both women and men, we shouldn't be drinking more than 14 units of alcohol a week, but actually we should be drinking much less. And also we're learning that it's important to give your livers and your guts a few days free of alcohol. So the other thing that you can do is if you do like to have a drink, that's fine, but have 2 or 3 days of the week when you don't drink alcohol at all. Give your gut and your liver a rest, let it recover. And then, if you want to have a drink at some point, that's fine. But just to keep that in moderation, because actually, particularly in women, we're far more sensitive to the effects of alcohol in people who have a lower weights or lower stature, or the older we get, the less our bodies are able to deal with the effects of alcohol, and it can become more dangerous. We're also aware that younger people are drinking a lot more alcohol now. It's been a huge problem that teenagers and young adults are drinking far too much alcohol. And it's something we really need to bear in mind and think about as a society, how we manage that.
Yeah, that sounds really important. And it's hard, isn't it, sometimes, because it's alcohol, the kind of relationship with alcohol can be really challenging. And in fact, I'm going to be doing an episode in the future around this, around how we choose to develop a healthy relationship with alcohol to help it be positive, but not lead into some of these really negative ways that it can impact on health. Could you talk a little bit about that relationship between, then we've talked about the liver, how important it is. We've talked about the microbiome and the complexity and how important that is to support. And just thinking now how they both might relate to well-being, to mental health, to brain health. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
No, of course. Alcohol, a lot of people drink alcohol because they say, well, it makes me feel happier. I'm stressed. I'm anxious. I'll have a drink. It'll make me feel relaxed. It will help me sleep is the other one. A lot of people say, I like to have a drink at night because I relax. It helps me sleep. And actually, it's the worst thing you can do because alcohol is actually a depressant of your brain and your nervous system. So it switches it off. So actually, if somebody's feeling low in mood or anxious, you're actually making the whole situation worse by having a drink of alcohol because it's making that depression worse. It impacts the release of those happy hormones I talked about in the brain. And so that's a huge misconception, I think, that people need to appreciate. But also sleep as well. If you drink alcohol regularly, it can actually impair your sleep pattern as well. So it's about understanding that actually the less alcohol people drink, the better their mental health will be, the better their sleep will be, the better their mood will be. And that's really, really important.
Definitely. I mean, I would often see people who are experiencing stress or low mood or anxiety, or perhaps even have experienced some form of trauma. And alcohol can become a coping strategy to try and sort of numb out, to try and step away from some difficult thoughts, feelings, emotions. And as you say, it has so many problematic impacts because at night, not only it's a depressant, but also it reduces our ability to process those difficult events. So overnight, normally our brain through sleep and particularly the REM part of sleep, our brain is processing all these difficult events. It's putting them, it's categorizing them. It's like a big library, and it's putting all the books that have been dumped on the floor during the day. It's putting them all back on the shelves. And when we've had alcohol, it's like the librarian's just gone on strike and is not doing any of that work. So we're just left with a big mess of stress and unprocessed memories in our brain. And so we wake up in the morning and feel so much worse because we wake up to that. It's like waking up to your house looking like a bomb site because there's been a party there and nobody's cleared up afterwards. And that's effectively what's happened in our brains. And so I would always say to people, the impact of alcohol is huge when it comes to dealing with stressful events. It takes away our ability to process, and it also has that negative impact on mood. So it's something I feel really, as you can tell, I feel really strongly about. It's such an important choice that people have.
And exactly, while we're talking about choices, I'm going to give you a little bit of a tip that I often say to my patients. So I'm going to talk about apples. Okay. We're all familiar with that analogy, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. We've all grown up with that. And where the hell did that come from? Well, apples are very rich in something called pectin. It's actually what makes jam set when you make jam. It's a chemical that comes out and it's a setting agent. But pectin is like nectar for your gut microbiome. Okay. Your gut microbiome absolutely loves pectin. It helps it to grow. It makes it stronger. It makes it more diverse. So actually, if we have one apple a day, or if it's not an apple, it could be any stoned fruit like a peach or a plum or anything with stones in it. If you, instead of having a glass of alcohol, have an apple, it actually helps your gut microbiome to produce short chain fatty acids, but also hormones like serotonin, which actually make us happier. So instead of having a glass of alcohol before you go to bed, have an apple. That's a tip. Okay. And everyone can afford an apple, I hope. Even I think the supermarkets still give children one piece of fruit free, don't they, if you go in there? So that's a really, really important tip that I can pass on.
I love that. So I'm going to get my apple out. Obviously, our dental colleagues would be saying, make sure you brush your teeth after eating that apple.
Well, absolutely. But, it's better than having some fizzy pop or something else with sugar in it.
100%. And such a small thing that can make a really big difference. So yes, there's something about not using alcohol as a way of coping with difficulties, because it increases them, makes us feel lower, and it actually has an impact physiologically that is negative. This is the Choice Pause, a short 2 to 3 minute tool you'll hear in every episode, each time with something different to help you pause, notice, and choose your next step. Today's pause is tuning into your body. Take a steady breath in and a longer breath out. Let your shoulders hang downwards and let go of any tension in your face or jaw. Your body sends out signals all the time. Small cues of energy, tension, hunger, or overwhelm. And when life is busy, those signals can often become drowned out. Take a moment to notice what your body is saying right now. Is it asking for rest, for nourishment, movement, perhaps a drink, or just a slower pace for a moment? As you listen, you might notice a pull towards some old habits or quick fixes that may not help and may cause us problems in the longer term. You don't need to act on these urges. Just acknowledge them with kindness. They're often a signal that you're stretched, tired, stressed, or that you're seeking relief or care. Now ask yourself, what small, realistic choice could genuinely support you? It might be stepping outside for a breath of fresh air, having something to eat, moving your body, or bringing your working day to a close on time today. Tuning into your body is a way of staying connected with yourself, learning to respond with compassion rather than pressure, and finding that space to make choices, to do the things that keep you well. Take one final breath and carry that sense of care and choice with you into whatever comes next today. Can you talk to us a bit about some of your research around the microbiome and that impact about well-being? And I know this is an area that's under development, and I think we're learning more and more. Tell us a bit about what you're doing with that.
So I'm going to go back to my my Quality Street box, okay, in that I've learned, and many of my colleagues have learned that I work with, that in certain diseases, chronic diseases, the gut microbiome becomes quite thick, quite dysfunctional, quite unwell, and you lose all that gut diversity. So you end up with all those orange and strawberry creams in your guts. And that becomes a long-standing thing, and your gut finds it more difficult to recover. And one of the things that I learned initially is that people with liver disease, for example, they have really thick gut microbiomes. And we don't entirely understand why, but we know it's a driver for progression of liver disease and for it being associated with making people unwell. So what I became very interested in is, how can I repair that sick gut microbiome to make it healthy again, to help people with chronic disease like liver disease? So some of the work that I've done, initially it was around diet and things we can support our gut microbiome with. But then I looked at uses of antibiotics. So whilst antibiotics can be bad for the gut, some types of antibiotics that don't sort of destroy all of the gut microbiome could be helpful. But then I moved on to thinking, well, antibiotics aren't really a good thing. It's not something we want to go in a direction where we want to be prescribing antibiotics to people, because antibiotics have a lot of harms. So what about, can we replace the whole gut microbiome to make it healthy again? And could that improve outcomes? So one of the things that I do a lot of research in is a treatment called fecal microbiota transplantation. What that effectively means is we get somebody that's very healthy, that doesn't have any chronic conditions and is nice and slim and not on any medications. And we take that individual and we actually get them to give us a stool sample. And then we screen those individuals. We make sure that they are healthy and that they don't have any chronic diseases or carry any nasty viruses or bacteria. So we screen it very much as if they were a donor for a kidney or a liver transplant or something. So we really robustly screen them. And then we take their stool and we make it into a preparation that we can then use as a treatment, as a therapy to individuals who've got sick microbiomes. And initially, we did that sort of very primitively by making a liquid preparation that we would often give to people via a nasogastric tube or via an endoscopy. But that's not an ideal thing. It's a bit yucky and not really particularly feasible in the long term. So we moved on then to making capsules of the bacteria in the stool that we can then give to individuals just like any other treatment, So in the morning they have a capsule and it helps to repair their gut microbiome. And that's a lot of the work that I've been doing. And I'm currently running a very, very big trial in the UK called the Promise Trial across 20 clinical sites when we're enrolling 300 individuals with liver disease to see if randomizing them to the capsules actually helps to repair their gut microbiome and helps to keep them healthy. And we have a placebo arm so that we can also factor in that psychological placebo effect, because we do know that sometimes people who think they're taking a tablet for something, they get better as well. And that's also a good thing. But we want to see if there's any additional benefits. And what we do know from using this fecal microbiota transplantation or these stool capsules is it's very safe. So we've shown in lots of studies that it's very safe, and actually very few people have any side effects. If anything, they feel better. But what we don't know yet is if it's going to impact on any sort of significant clinical outcomes that are important, but because it's fine to feel a little bit better, but we also want to be able to show that it can protect people against getting infections or their disease getting worse. And one of the interesting things that we've also been looking at, I work with a fantastic colleague called Victoria Cronston, who is very interested in the link between mental health and the gut, is we're actually evaluating also whether when we're treating these individuals, if it can actually treat depression and anxiety as well. So one of the sub-studies we're doing in the Promise trial is to look to see if we can make people's mental health and anxiety and actual, for example, cravings for alcohol and things like that can be improved also by having this treatment. So it's a very exciting avenue of research.
So interesting. So I guess you could imagine that the microbiome for someone who was drinking heavily would be influenced. And so perhaps you might grow a lot of bacteria who quite like alcohol and would then encourage you to keep drinking. And so is that the theory, that hopefully that might shift in somebody who doesn't have that relationship with alcohol, that they're supported to make choices because the microbiome doesn't want alcohol as much either?
Exactly, you're spot on there. And also, but can you believe some gut bacteria actually can produce alcohol? So you can be entirely abstinent from alcohol, but if you've got some bacteria that produce alcohol, that can actually feed alcohol into your system. And we know that particularly people who are overweight or have diabetes are more likely to develop these bacteria that produce alcohol. So you can imagine that compounds things. But what we do know is things like improving your diet, having more fruit and vegetables can actually counteract that as well. So just because you're not involved in a trial that's replacing gut microbiome doesn't mean you can't do things yourself to help your gut microbiome.
Thinking about the purpose for doing those things, it sounds like there really are some quite important reasons, because it's not always easy to change our diet. We might have long habits about how we're busy, we're tired, life is expensive. It's hard sometimes to buy foods that, as you say, maybe apples are not so expensive, but sometimes other fruit and veg can be quite expensive. So there are barriers, aren't there? Do you think it makes a difference to even make some changes in that direction?
It is. I think it is quite simple, because I know a lot of people move to processed foods, ultra processed foods, particularly because they see they're cheaper, but actually a lot of them aren't. When you think about it, and you go to the high street and you go and buy a takeaway, whatever, it's actually not that cheap at all. It's a lot easier to make healthy choices if you can by buying more raw ingredients and making a big dish of something that you spread out through the week. And it's very easy to sometimes add things to improve that. One of the things I like this morning, I've sent my kids to school with apples, even if it's apple slices or you put it in some nice, fun way. I've sent them to school with an apple each because I know that that's going to help them fight infections and things like that. So it's just a step in that right direction. And obviously we have to look to find ways that we can increase the diversity by looking for fruits and vegetables that maybe aren't so expensive. We don't have to have exotic things.
I completely agree. I mean, for example, I would often top up a bolognese by adding a couple of tins or dried lentils, but tinned lentils are very cheap. They're very easy. You literally just drain them and pour them in, and they add bulk. They're much cheaper than adding the meat. My kids don't really notice them because they sort of disappear, which makes them much more palatable and easy, and that adds fibre and just increases the diversity of that meal a bit. And maybe adding in some other vegetables, some sweet corn, some frozen spinach, again, it disappears. You never know it was there. It's sort of magical.
Actually, frozen vegetables, people think about fresh vegetables, but frozen vegetables are often much cheaper to buy in the supermarket, and you can keep them in the freezer. They don't go off. And like you say, you can just add them. And frozen fruits as well. You can buy a lot of frozen fruits much, 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 much cheaper than you can buying it fresh. And I think it's really, really important. But even you said a bolognese, but a tin of tomatoes is really good for you, A tin of tomatoes has got lots, and adding things like herbs, dried herbs and things like that. All of these things can really help.
So it might be sometimes about a little bit of a mindset shift about just thinking, perhaps, what can I add? I think we're often programmed to think I need to eat less or to take away. And actually, it's almost reversing that to think, what can I add in to make this more diverse, to make it more interesting, to make it a little bit more leaning into something that would feed my whole microbiome and not just part of the microbiome.
And the other thing, Lee, that's sometimes very available in supermarkets is pastas that are made not from wheat, but are made from chickpeas or other things, spinach. You can get lots of vegetable pastas now that aren't very expensive, and your kids won't even notice. Changed from wheat pasta to lentil pasta.
Yeah, and I think that really leans into not trying to suddenly institute this whole dietary shift where everyone in the family looks at the food and says, what is that? I'm not eating that. Versus, okay, what do we eat now? And how can we just start to adapt that so it's still palatable, we still like it, it's still familiar enough, but yet it's got some ingredients that move it in the direction, and you can kind of lead them bit by bit towards a bit of a change. I don't know if you found that's been possible in your family.
Yeah. Actually, I have a son who's got celiac disease, so he can't have wheat. So I've had to look at ways to avoid wheat. And that's when I've realised there's a lot of alternatives that don't really cost much more money. Then the whole family can have those.
Are there any other choices that we could make that might have a positive influence on our microbiome for our well-being?
Yeah, so the other thing to mention is we've talked about diet, we've talked about alcohol, but activity levels and doing exercise is actually also good for your gut microbiome. And it's really, really important to do that because I'm sure you're very aware that exercise generally makes people feel a little bit happier, and it releases lots of happy hormones, but it also helps to stimulate our gut microbiomes as well. And we know that Olympic athletes and sportsmen, it's not just about their diet, but actually they do have really healthy gut microbiomes. There's something about the exercise and the hormones that are released from exercise that are also good for our guts and works very well with what we eat. So that would be another important thing just to add in.
So interesting, and you're absolutely right. It's something very close to my heart. I think exercise is really important for emotional well-being, for mental health. There was a lovely meta-analysis in the BMJ, I think last year, looking at the impact of exercise for depression and comparing it with other treatments like antidepressants and therapy. And actually it was really effective and possibly more effective than the others. So it's a really lovely thing to do that, again, doesn't have to cost us a lot of money, doesn't have the impact of medication side effects, but can really lift our mood in lots of positive ways. And actually also can make us, depending on what we do, can make us feel connected to other people. If we go for walks or park run, which I'm a great believer in, then we get that sense of community connection, which is also very important for well-being.
Absolutely.
I'm interested in how that link for the microbiome, do you think it is related to hormones that are released? Because it's really interesting to think what might be happening there.
I think it is. I think it is about toxins that are released or not released. So good things are produced from the gut microbiome, less bad things. But I think also we know that exercise, for example, stimulates your liver and your muscle too. When you exercise, it encourages your liver to get rid of fat from inside the liver. And having lots of fat, just like anywhere else in our bodies, in our livers can be very dangerous. So actually doing exercise removes fat from your liver. And it also enhances muscle to metabolize toxins, because your muscles are actually very good at breaking down and dealing with toxins too. And they actually can then form them into proteins and amino acids that are then used as building blocks. It's got so many different benefits. It also increases our consumption of sugar, burns up sugar in our bodies, so we're less likely to get things like diabetes as well. So you can't really think of anything bad at all with increasing activity levels and doing exercise.
Well, that's fantastic. And I would just say to people to think about just taking small steps towards movement. So don't get overwhelmed by expecting to do high level intensity exercise straight away, but just moving more is the start, and then maybe building that up as we get more confident and we get more used to it. So making it part of our daily life, I think, is a really important way to do that.
So I always say a good tip is, if you're about to take the lift, just think, could I take the stairs? Just one flight. Just silly little things can make so much difference.
They can, and we're hearing a lot about the impact of not just activity, but of being sedentary, so sitting a lot. And I think I know I certainly do sit a lot for work. And so we need to remember to actually get up and move, even in very small ways. So maybe a minute of movement more frequently. And those exercise micro snacking is actually really powerful and can have a big cumulative effect, which doesn't mean we've got to go to the gym for an hour necessarily. It's more about moving throughout the day. And I think that would fit with what you're saying.
Absolutely. And also, if you do exercise in the fresh air, it's always so much better, isn't it, for our minds and our brains to actually go and get a bit of fresh air and get a bit more oxygen to the brain too.
Absolutely. Look at the sky, get a bit of perspective in life, breathe in the air. I love that. Fantastic. It's been such a helpful conversation, Debbie. Just to finish, if you could leave listeners with 2 practical choice-based takeaways. So just quick tips for supporting their gut-liver-brain connection. What would you suggest?
So I think it has to be about making your diet more colourful. So trying to increase your fruit and vegetables if you can. But if not, start trying to have an apple a day. Would be a really, really good start. Can't go wrong with that. And I think the second thing, we talked about alcohol, didn't we, is just next time you go to pour yourself a glass of wine before you go to bed, think about, actually, is that going to really help me relax and sleep? Could I do something else, have a cup of herbal tea instead, that might actually help me more?
I love that. And I think I would just go back to the exercise part and just remind people that physical movement helps our mental health, it helps our physical health. And we've learned today it helps our microbiome. So that's so many good reasons to keep moving. And I would join you with the alcohol, and just remember that we all have stresses and strains, and alcohol does not help us to process them. It gets in the way and it makes it harder to recover after difficult things have happened. So choosing ways that actually, maybe it's connecting with someone, maybe it's journaling, something that supports us to process difficulties is also really important, because I just don't think alcohol does that. So brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me, Debbie. It's so interesting to hear about the links between well-being and the work you're doing. And so I'll be very interested to hear what happens with your research. I'll be keeping an eye on what we can learn.
I'll have to come back and update you once we get some exciting results, hopefully.
Oh, I'd love that. That'd be fantastic. Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Choice Space podcast. I hope this conversation has offered a little more room to pause, breathe, and find your own way forward. If today's episode has been helpful, please download, follow, and share with someone else who might value the space as well. I'd love to have you with me for the next episode. Until then, take care and keep making space for what matters most. Today's episode was produced and edited by Elle Dixon.